Welcome to the channel, and thank you for tuning in. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Before we dive into today's story, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next incredible story coming your way tomorrow. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to take you on this journey. Grab a seat, relax, and enjoy the adventure that unfolds. Anger, regret, and a tourist who lost it at Buckingham Palace. Ethan Carter, a 32-year-old tourist from Los Angeles, had always dreamed of visiting London. As a child, he would flip through glossy travel magazines, gazing at images of the Tower, Bridge, the Houses of Parliament, and, of course, Buckingham Palace. The grand architecture, the history, and the culture, he couldn't wait to experience it all. After months of planning and saving, Ethan finally found himself walking down the busy streets of London, the city of his dreams. However, what was supposed to be the perfect vacation quickly turned into a series of unfortunate events. From the moment he checked into his hotel, things started to go wrong. He had splurged a little on what he thought was a top-tier hotel with a prime location. But to his dismay, his room was far from what he had imagined. The air conditioning in his room was broken, and the temperature inside was unbearable. It seemed like the hotel staff wasn't in much of a hurry to fix the issue either. Ethan tried to remain calm, reminding himself that this was just a small setback. He couldn't let it ruin his mood. After all, he was in London. But when the hot air from the hotel room left him drenched in sweat, the frustration began to build. The next day, Ethan decided to treat himself to a nice meal at a highly recommended restaurant. However, that too turned out to be disappointing. The food was cold, and the prices were outrageously high for the quality. The waiter's indifferent attitude didn't help either. Ethan tried to brush it off as one of those things that happens when you're traveling, but his patience was wearing thin. As if the hotel and restaurant experiences weren't enough, something worse happened. On the underground, while making his way to the iconic Buckingham Palace, Ethan became a victim of a pickpocket. He felt a light tug on his backpack and turned around just in time to see a man slipping through the crowd. When he checked his wallet, his worst fear came true. It was gone. Although Ethan managed to catch a glimpse of the thief before he disappeared, it was too late. The loss of his wallet not only added to his irritation but also made him feel vulnerable in a city that he had once been so eager to explore. By the time Ethan finally reached the palace, he was in a foul mood, his excitement for the visit replaced by frustration and annoyance. The hot July sun was relentless, beating down on the bustling streets of London. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his Hawaiian shirt clung to his back, a sharp contrast to the more formally dressed visitors around him. Still, the sight of Buckingham Palace brought a slight sense of awe. The palace stood majestically against the bright blue sky, its cream-colored facade gleaming in the sunlight. Ethan couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement as he approached the magnificent gates, but that feeling quickly dissipated when he saw the massive crowd gathered in front of it. Tourists from all over the world had gathered around, eagerly snapping photos of the palace. The crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder, each person trying to find the perfect angle for their shot. Children were perched on their parents' shoulders, and tour guides wielded colorful umbrellas to keep their groups together. The cacophony of different languages filled the air as tourists chattered excitedly. Ethan's heart sank as he realized that getting a decent view of the palace might be more difficult than he had imagined. But he was determined to make the most of it, despite the overwhelming crowd. Pushing through the throngs of people, ignoring the disapproving glances and murmured complaints of other visitors, Ethan moved forward. His camera bag swung wildly at his side, occasionally bumping into people as he squeezed through the crowd. A young woman holding a baby shot him an angry look as he brushed past her, but Ethan paid no mind. He was so focused on getting to the front of the crowd that he barely noticed the tension building around him. In his mind, this was supposed to be a moment of triumph. He had dreamed of seeing Buckingham Palace for years, but instead, it felt like just another setback in a vacation that had already gone wrong in so many ways. Little did Ethan know, The next few minutes would set the stage for a confrontation that would turn his vacation from frustrating to unforgettable. As the crowds pushed closer and the heat intensified, Ethan's emotions began to simmer, unaware that he was about to take a step that would change everything. Ethan's frustration had been building for days, and as he stood before Buckingham Palace, it seemed like everything he had hoped for had slipped through his fingers. The grand gates, the iconic architecture, the history, it was all overshadowed by his mounting irritations. The heat of the July sun beat down mercilessly, and the growing throngs of tourists did nothing to ease his mood. His Hawaiian shirt was now drenched in sweat, clinging to his body, while his cargo shorts did little to help him stand out from the more formally dressed visitors. He had come to London with a dream, but the reality had been less than he'd imagined. The crowd around him was thick, packed tightly like sardines, all vying for a perfect shot of the palace. People jostled each other, children were perched on their parents' shoulders, and tour guides held up bright umbrellas to keep their groups together. The air buzzed with a mix of languages as tourists excitedly discussed the sights before them. Ethan tried to push through the mass of people, his frustration only growing as each step felt like a battle. He had spent too many days in London, already feeling cheated, and now even the famous Buckingham Palace seemed to be slipping from his grasp. "Excuse me," he muttered under his breath, inching forward. His camera bag swung wildly at his side, occasionally bumping into people, making him more and more agitated. He bumped into a man carrying a large camera, and the man shot him a glare, but Ethan didn't care. He was focused solely on getting closer to the front. With every step, his anger increased. He had come this far, and he was going to get that perfect shot no matter what. At this point, Ethan was ignoring everything around him: the disapproving looks, the muttered complaints of tourists, even the young woman with a baby who shot him an angry stare as he squeezed by. The crowd was thick, but Ethan didn't feel like waiting. His camera was the only thing on his mind. He needed that shot for social media, something to prove that his vacation wasn't a total bust. He had already experienced so many misadventures: lost wallet, broken air conditioning, overpriced food. This had to be the moment where things finally turned around. As he reached the front of the crowd, he saw a small opening directly in front of the Royal Guard, Private Adam Green. The soldier stood motionless, his stern expression unwavering despite the brutal heat. Ethan's heart raced with excitement as he realized this was his chance. He stood just a little too close to the guard, completely ignoring the designated viewing area. But nothing mattered to him at that moment. The perfect shot was all he could focus on. A nearby tour guide politely called out, "Sir, please step back behind the barrier." But Ethan pretended not to hear. He fiddled with his camera settings, trying to adjust it just right, determined to get the perfect picture. The crowd around him began to murmur, their voices tinged with annoyance as they voiced their complaints. But Ethan remained stubborn. He wasn't going to let these small inconveniences ruin the one thing that could make this trip feel worthwhile. And Zuz, elderly British woman, tapped him on the shoulder, her voice filled with authority. "Young man, you're not supposed to be that close. There are rules, you know," she said with a stern, proper English accent. Ethan's patience snapped. He spun around, his face red with irritation. "I just need one good picture." He snapped back, his voice sharp, not even bothering to turn fully around. "Just 1 minute, that's all." The tension in the air was palpable now. More tourists began to notice Ethan's disregard for the rules, and the atmosphere shifted. Parents pulled their children closer, unsure of what would happen next, while others began recording the scene on their phones. The growing chaos fueled Ethan's frustration. He was tired of following rules that seemed to hold him back. This was his vacation, and he would do things his way. Private Green, despite the growing commotion around him, remained unmoving, his gaze straight ahead. But he was keenly aware of the situation unfolding. The crowd was agitated, and Ethan was acting more erratic by the second. Sweat poured down Ethan's back as his hands began to shake slightly, his grip tightening on his camera. His irritation was building into something deeper, something uncontrollable. The tension was becoming unbearable both for him and for everyone around him. But little did they know, this seemingly trivial moment was about to escalate into something far more serious. Ethan's vacation, which had already been marred by misfortunes, was now on the brink of becoming something much worse. A confrontation that would change his life forever. The rules, which seemed so trivial just moments ago, were about to matter more than anyone could have predicted. The air around Buckingham Palace was thick with tension, and Ethan could feel it building with every passing second. The frustration that had been simmering in him since he arrived in London was now bubbling over, and he was starting to lose his composure. Standing in front of the royal guard, Private Adam Green, he could see the anger in the eyes of the tourists around him. He didn't care. He had already dealt with too much disappointment on this trip, and now this perfect photo opportunity was slipping away from him. The elderly British woman's words echoed in his ears. "There are rules, you know." Ethan didn't want to hear it. His hand trembled as he adjusted the camera, trying to get the perfect shot, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to focus. The crowd was pressing in on him, their murmurs of disapproval growing louder with each moment. But all he could think about was the photo. That perfect shot for his social media, something to make this disastrous vacation feel worthwhile. "Sir, please step back behind the barrier," the tour guide had said again, her voice becoming firmer. Ethan didn't even glance at her this time. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself even closer to the guard. His mind was clouded with frustration, and his desire for the perfect photo now seemed to outweigh everything else. The growing tension in the air didn't faze him. He was fixated on getting that shot. He had been through too much already to let this moment slip by. Around him, the crowd grew more agitated. People started to murmur louder, their voices tinged with annoyance as they complained about being blocked from their views. Ethan noticed the disapproving glances, but it only made him more determined to stand his ground. His camera bag swung wildly by his side as he continued to adjust the lens, trying to get the perfect angle. A few people tried to push past him, muttering under their breath as they moved around. Ethan barely acknowledged them, focusing instead on the shot he was trying to capture. Then a young woman with a child on her shoulders shot him an angry look, her eyes flashing with frustration. Ethan didn't care. He was beyond the point of caring. He had come all the way from Los Angeles, and this was supposed to be his moment of victory, the highlight of his trip. He wasn't going to let something as trivial as a few angry tourists ruin it. But as the seconds ticked by, the tension in the air thickened. The crowd's frustration grew with every passing minute, and the situation was about to escalate. Private Green, standing motionless in his red uniform, kept his eyes forward, his expression stoic, as if he hadn't noticed the mounting chaos around him. But Ethan, in his agitation, noticed something. The soldier's face was slightly flushed from the heat, and his jaw was clenched. Ethan smirked to himself. So even the guards get uncomfortable, he thought, and that thought fueled his frustration even more. He was so caught up in the moment, so blinded by his anger and desire to make this vacation something worth remembering, that he began to lose control. "Just one more minute," Ethan muttered under his breath, as if the universe would somehow hear him and grant him the perfect shot. He adjusted the lens on his camera, trying to block out the growing murmurs and the increasing pressure from the crowd. But the heat, the tension, the weight of his frustration, it was all too much. His hands were shaking now, his grip tight on the camera. He was teetering on the edge. The disapproving murmurs from the crowd intensified. People were getting visibly irritated by Ethan's refusal to step back. His impatience was palpable, his actions growing erratic with each passing second. And yet, he didn't move. The other tourists were now shifting uneasily, stepping back slightly to avoid his camera bag swinging wildly by his side. Then, in a moment of pure recklessness, something inside Ethan snapped. The camera clicked in his hands as his gaze shifted between the guard, the gravel beneath his feet, and the crowd behind him. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was overwhelmed with anger, disappointment, and the growing sense that everything he had planned was slipping away. In a split second, he scooped up a handful of gravel from the palace grounds and, without thinking, threw it straight at Private Green. Time seemed to slow as the small stones and sand flew through the air, landing squarely on the guard's face. The crowd gasped, a sharp intake of breath that seemed to hang in the air for a beat longer than it should have. Private Green, caught completely off guard, stood frozen as the particles of sand and gravel hit him. His eyes squeezed shut as some of the gravel made its way into his eyes and mouth. The moment of chaos had arrived. The crowd erupted in disbelief, their shock palpable as people scrambled to pull out their phones, recording the unthinkable scene unfolding before them. Parents shielded their children's eyes, while others stood frozen, not quite believing what they had just witnessed. Ethan's breath quickened, the anger in him quickly turning to fear as the reality of what he had just done began to sink. In the moment Ethan threw the gravel, everything changed. The small, seemingly insignificant action transformed the situation from mere frustration into chaos. Time seemed to freeze as the particles of sand and small stones flew through the air. Ethan's heart raced as he watched them strike Private Green in the face, some of them landing in the guard's eyes. For a brief moment, the world around Ethan was silent, a strange calm settling over him as he realized what he had just done. But that calm was quickly shattered by the reaction of the crowd. The gasps and shouts of horror echoed across the palace, grounds cutting through the thick air. People recoiled in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. Parents quickly pulled their children away, shielding them from the scene unfolding before them. Tourists who had been so focused on capturing the beauty of Buckingham Palace were now recording what could only be described as a public spectacle. Ethan stood frozen for a heartbeat, unable to comprehend the gravity of his actions. His breath caught in his throat as he saw Private Green standing motionless despite the pain. The guard's face, though now covered with sand and dust, remained stern. His eyes squeezed shut, but his posture never faltered. Ethan's stomach churned with a sickening realization. This wasn't just an outburst. This was an assault. For the first time, fear crept into his chest, but it was too late to turn back. The damage was done. A sharp cry from someone in the crowd, "Someone stop him!" pierced through the air, and the first signs of security responding were visible as plainclothes officers appeared on the outskirts of the scene, moving in quickly but discreetly. But Ethan was no longer thinking clearly. The adrenaline that had fueled his reckless actions was now replaced by panic. His hands were shaking, his heart thundering in his ears. He didn't know what to do. Run? Hide? He felt trapped, like a rat cornered by its own impulses. Ethan took a step back, his gaze flickering between the agitated crowd and the two royal guards now taking action. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just about a perfect photo anymore. This was an international incident, a mistake that would follow him for the rest of his life. As the first security officer approached, Ethan's instincts kicked in. He muttered something under his breath. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to." But his words were drowned out by the growing shouts of the crowd. The officer who had been watching the scene unfold from a distance stepped forward, his expression grim. "Sir, this is your last warning," he said firmly, his voice cold as he moved to restrain Ethan. His hand rested near the radio on his belt, ready to call for backup. But before Ethan could react, the world around him exploded in movement. The crowd, once passive tourists, was now an active mob, with phones raised and voices shouting. Ethan felt a cold sweat trickle down his neck as he realized the full extent of the consequences. He had gone too far. This wasn't just an awkward moment in his vacation. It was a public assault on a soldier, an act of disrespect toward one of the Queen's guards. He wasn't just a frustrated tourist anymore. He was a criminal, and everyone was watching. Private Green, despite the pain and shock, stood his ground. His composure was incredible, his training kicking in as he maintained his position, refusing to break. The crowd, however, wasn't so composed. Some were still recording, while others were whispering and pointing, murmuring about what should happened next? A few children, wide-eyed and confused, were pulled close to their parents, shielding their eyes from the disturbing spectacle unfolding before them. Ethan's legs felt weak, the weight of his camera bag now a physical burden. The reality of the situation was becoming clearer with each passing second. He had made a decision that would ruin everything, and there was no way to undo it. The officers were closing in, their steps steady and sure, and Ethan felt a surge of panic that he couldn't shake. His hands gripped the strap of his camera bag tightly, as if it could offer some comfort in this nightmare. He looked toward the exit, but the path was blocked. Officers were already positioned around the perimeter, their eyes scanning the crowd. For the perpetrator. Ethan's mind raced. He had only moments before the full force of the law would descend upon him. The sickening realization settled in. His vacation, which had already been disastrous, was now over. But the worst part? It wasn't just his vacation that was ruined. It was his entire future, all because of a single, impulsive moment of anger. The seconds felt like hours as security moved closer, their eyes locked on him. Ethan could see the crowd's eyes on him too, the murmurs growing louder. The weight of their judgment was suffocating. His vacation, which had begun with excitement and anticipation, had now turned into a nightmare of his own making. The guards had not moved a muscle, their expressions unchanged, but it was clear that this moment, this reckless, impulsive act, would be remembered long after he left the palace grounds. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the chaos around him escalated. The gravel he had thrown at Private Green had hit its mark, and now the full consequences were crashing down on him. The crowd, once a sea of excited tourists, had turned into an angry mob, all eyes on him. Phones flashed as people recorded the incident, the hum of their voices swelling with each passing second. Ethan's panic grew with every moment. He could feel the weight of his mistake, the overwhelming realization that he had crossed a line, one that could not be erased. This was no longer just a tourist misadventure. This was an international incident, and Ethan was at the center of it. The first security officer, a tall man in plain clothes, approached him with measured steps. His face was impassive, but there was no mistaking the severity of the situation. Ethan stood frozen, his hands trembling at his sides, as he glanced nervously between the officer and the growing sea of tourists behind him. His mind raced, but it was like running in place. He couldn't figure out how to fix the mess he had made. "I didn't mean it," he muttered under his breath, though he knew the words would never undo what had happened. The gravel was already. In Private Green's eyes, his dignity already marred. The incident had been caught on dozens of phones, shared across social media, and there was no way to take it back. This wasn't a small mistake. It was an assault, and Ethan was the perpetrator. The city officer moved closer, his hand resting near the radio on his belt, ready to call for backup. "Sir," he said in a tone that was as cold as it was calm, "this is your final warning. Step back and stay where you are." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. His anger, his frustration with the series of failures during his vacation, had driven him to a point of recklessness. And now, all of that was catching up to him. The people around him started to move, some stepping back, some edging forward to get a better view of the spectacle. The murmurs in the crowd were growing louder now, and Ethan could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering to one another, their faces filled with disbelief. Some had already shared their videos, the hashtag Buckingham Palace assault beginning to trend on social media. Ethan's face burned with shame. What had started as a dream vacation had spiraled into a nightmare that would follow him forever. He glanced toward the exit, but it was blocked. More plainclothes officers had appeared, subtly moving into place around the perimeter, scanning the crowd for the suspect. Ethan's legs felt like lead, his body paralyzed by the enormity of what he had done. There was no escape now. The officers were moving closer, their focus on him unwavering. He could see the stern expressions of the guards stationed nearby, their discipline unbroken despite the growing chaos. Private Green, still standing at attention, was receiving medical aid, but it was clear that Ethan had gone too far. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a life-altering mistake. Suddenly, Ethan felt the sharp sting of regret. He had wanted nothing more than to capture a perfect photo, to finally make his trip to London something memorable. But this was unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. His camera, which had been a symbol of his excitement just hours before, now felt like an anchor, weighing him down. The flashing lights of police vehicles and the voices of the officers closing in on him only added to the suffocating feeling in his chest. His thoughts were a blur. He had acted on impulse, not considering the consequences. And now it was too late. The officers were in front of him, and the moment of reckoning had arrived. "Put your hands where we can see them," one of them commanded, his voice firm, but controlled. Ethan complied, his shoulders slumping as the adrenaline drained from his body. He had no fight left in him. This was it. His vacation, his life as he had known it, was over. The officers moved in swiftly and efficiently. His camera was removed from his neck, his belongings were catalogued, and before he knew it, the cold metal of handcuffs was fastening around his wrists. The world around him seemed to blur as he was escorted away, the crowd still murmuring and recording, their phones capturing every moment of his humiliation. The reality of the situation was undeniable now. Ethan Patterson, the tourist who had come to London for adventure, was about to face the consequences of his actions in a way he could never have imagined. As he was led through the crowd, the flashing lights of police cars reflecting in the windows of nearby shops, Ethan realized something he had been too angry to acknowledge before. His impulsive decision had not only ruined his vacation, it had altered his future in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. His name was already making headlines, and the repercussions of his actions would follow him long after he left the palace grounds. His trip to Buckingham Palace, once the pinnacle of his dream vacation, had transformed into a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of letting frustration and anger dictate your actions. And as the police van pulled away, the blue lights flashing through the London streets, Ethan realized that his life would never be the same. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story, so let us know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had a vacation go completely off track, like Ethan's? How did you handle it? And what would you have done differently if you were in his shoes? We know it's easy to get frustrated when things don't go according to plan, but how do you think Ethan could have turned things around? Also, what do you think about the way he handled the situation at Buckingham Palace? Do you believe his reaction was understandable given his frustrations, or did he cross the line? We want to know your opinions. This is a space for open discussion, and we encourage you to share your experiences and advice with fellow viewers. And don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, and we'd love for you to be part of the conversation every time we post. Let us know where you're watching from, and stay tuned for the next story. It might just surprise you.